Introducing YouTube memberships, a fun way to support the channel while getting some exclusive perks. Click the join button to become a member now and get benefits like badges next to your name on videos, behind-the-scenes photos, advantages during the live trivia game, discounts on merchandise, private one-on-one video chats, the ability to request future video topics, and exclusive 8 to 10 minute videos on the history of the NFL. And now, on with our feature presentation. What's the golden rule of a winning streak? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Don't change up a winning formula. If there's something that's working, why on earth would you mess with it? You're on a nice hitting streak in baseball, and you have a walk-up song that you've been using? Yeah, keep that. You have a routine that you do before you shoot your free throw, and you've been hitting every single one of those? Keep doing that. You get the idea. You do not mess with something that is working, especially when it's working incredibly well. And for the team that you've been watching, the 1989 Houston Oilers, they enter the game in our story as one of the hottest teams in all of football. After a sluggish 2-3 start to the season through 5 weeks, there was perhaps no team in the AFC more dangerous than Jerry Glanville's Oilers. They had won 5 of their last 7, and had done some great things in that stretch, including a win against the reigning AFC champion Cincinnati Bengals, a sweep against the Pittsburgh Steelers, which included a 27-0 shutout victory, and a 3-possession win over a good Los Angeles Raiders team. So going into one of the biggest games of the season, and a must-win game when you step back and evaluate things, you would figure that you wouldn't mess with anything that's been working and that's gotten you to this point. You've won 5 out of 7. You're playing lights out, relatively speaking. You're riding a 5-game winning streak at home, and you're firing on all cylinders against some pretty good football teams, to the point where the only team even remotely comparable to how hot you've been lately in the conference is the Denver Broncos. But prior to their Week 14 game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, let's just say that the Oilers did not get that memo at all. Or at the very least, their medical staff did not get the memo at all. Not in the slightest bit. Because they decided to change things up for some bizarre reason. And let's just say that it almost cost the Oilers their entire season in one of the strangest ways possible. Because with the two teams playing each other this weekend, if you're watching at the time that this video is dropping, it feels like a good time to tell this insane story that you've probably never heard of. Because this is the story behind the bizarre drama of the 1989 Houston Oilers. Before I talk about the incident in question, we need some context to understand how the game itself was going, as well as the stark difference that will become apparently obvious as the video goes on. It's December 10th, 1989. It's Week 14 of the NFL season. As we're wrapping up the year and approaching the final push for the playoffs, we've got a big game on our hands down at the Houston Astrodome between the Houston Oilers and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, the Bucs were an absolutely garbage team. They were 5-8. They had absolutely nothing to play for but pride, having been mathematically eliminated from the playoffs, and they had lost 6 of their last 8 games. So they were the anti-Oilers in terms of how hot they were looking. For the Oilers, however, this game meant the world. The Oilers were up by just half a game in the ever-tight AFC Central, sitting at 8-5, while the Browns were right behind at 7-5-1, and the Bengals were right behind at 7-6. They did not have a lot of room for error, especially considering their final 2 games of the regular season were against none other than the Bengals and the Browns, the latter of which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. So if the Oilers could give themselves a bit of a cushion, considering their all-important gauntlet to end the season, that would be absolutely vital, and would really increase their chances of making it back to the playoffs for the 3rd straight season. On paper, this should be an easy game to do it in, right? The Oilers enter this game with a top 5 offense in football, having scored 318 points, or just under 25 points per game. And they were going up against the Buccaneers team that had the 2nd worst defense in football, having given up 335 points, or nearly 26 points per game, with the only team worse than them being the Dallas Cowboys, who had allowed 338 points. So the Bucs were awfully close to being the worst of the worst. It was the unstoppable force against the completely movable object. And to start the game off, as you could tell, the Oilers were on the front foot and were taking care of business like just about everyone expected them to. They entered this game as 8-point favorites, and were playing like that and then some, as throughout the first half, this game was not even a competition. Through the first 30 minutes of the contest, the Oilers were leading 20-3, thanks in part to 2 touchdown passes by Warren Moon, with one being a 12-yarder to Drew Hill, and the other being a 16-yarder to Curtis Duncan. The Oilers had 218 yards of total offense, establishing a solid ground game behind one of the best 1-2 punches in football in Mike Rozier and Alonzo Highsmith, as the team had 77 rushing yards in that stretch, while Moon added 141 yards of his own through the air. He was on pace for close to 300 yards. The special teams unit blocked the punt. Just about every single drive was getting into Tampa territory. The Oilers were dominating the time of possession battle, with over 17 minutes and 34 seconds of possession compared to just 12 minutes and 16 seconds for the Bucs. And the defense was playing lights out. It's not like the Bucs had a great rushing attack in the first place. They had a game against Washington earlier in the season where they had just 1 rushing yard across the entire contest. And they finished the season 23rd out of 28 teams in rushing yards, 23rd in rushing touchdowns, and 20th in yards per carry. But it was still awfully impressive as to what the Oilers were doing, as throughout the first half, they held the Bucs to just 6 rushing yards. That's it. 6 yards across the entire half. Whether it was Lars Tate or Sylvester Stamps or whoever else, no one was able to get anything going on the ground. The Oilers had a 17-point lead going into the halftime break, and it looked like it was going to be super smooth sailing the rest of the way, and all but a formality that the Oilers would hold on in this one against one of the worst teams in football and one of the worst defenses in football with a 3-score lead. But in the second half, oh man, that did not happen at all. Because as you can tell from the second half performance, yeah, it was like watching a completely different ball game. The good news for the Oilers was that they still won the contest. And at the end of the day, a win is a win, as they were able to improve to 9-5 and were able to maintain their hold on first place in the AFC Central for the time being, making it more likely than not that they would be playing in the postseason. The bad news, though, was that they looked terrible. In fact, at the time, it may have been the worst half of football that they played all season. That 20-3 score at the half? By the end of the game, the Oilers only won 20-17, and they're actually extremely fortunate that they did not lose that game, seeing as with 2 minutes left, the Bucs were in Houston territory before a controversial fumble that really didn't look like a fumble, at least not by 2023 standards in terms of what establishing possession means. In the first half of the game, the Oilers scored 20 points. In the second half, 0, zilch, nada, nothing. In the first half, the Oilers had 218 yards of offense. In the second half, they had just 66 yards, or 30% of their output over the first 30 minutes. In the first half, Warren Moon could do no wrong, throwing for 141 yards. In the second half, he had just 8 passing yards, or 5% of what he had in the first half. And it wasn't because the Oilers just abandoned the passing game. In the first half, the Oilers had the ball for 17 minutes and 34 seconds. In the second half, they only had it for 9 minutes and 14 seconds, having it for just 30% of the half. That is an atrocious split. The idea that 7 out of every 10 minutes and a half, one team can have the ball is abysmal. And defensively, it's not like the Oilers were any better. In the first half, the Bucs had 153 yards of offense, while in the second half, they had 200 yards, or 30% more than they had over the first 30 minutes of the contest. And none of those yards were in garbage time or anything like that. Again, the Bucs were down by 3 with 2 minutes left and had the ball in Houston territory, looking ready to, at the bare minimum, tie the game up. In the first half, the Bucs had 6 yards rushing. In the second half, that number had increased to 60, or 10 times the first half output. And keep in mind, this was with the Bucs having to abandon the run somewhat, seeing as they were down by 3 scores and you don't exactly have a whole lot of time to play with. The Bucs had nearly 21 minutes of possession, and Vinny Testaverde, after not being able to do a whole lot in the first half, ended up finishing the game with 328 yards, actually playing some good football and looking like that first overall pick the Bucs drafted all those years ago. Yes, the Oilers won this game, and yes, they got out of there with a win, but man, did they look sluggish in the second half. It was like watching a completely different team out there, and was almost like Space Jam, where out of nowhere, all the talent just gets sucked out of them. Which raises the obvious question: what gives? Why do they look so good and so dominant in the first half, and yet, as you've been able to tell, so terrible and god-awful in the second half? Why were they firing on all cylinders in the first half, and yet, over the second half, looked like they had no idea what they were doing? It had nothing to do with halftime adjustments or anything that Tampa did differently, or anything that Houston changed up from an X's and O's standpoint, or any personnel differences, or anything along those lines. Trust me, if it was anything like that, I would not be making this video, because that happens a lot where a team makes a comeback in the second half due to some sort of adjustment or their own doing. The real answer is drugs. Lots and lots of drugs. No, I am not making that up. No, I am not kidding or over-exaggerating when I say that. The real reason that the Oilers almost lost this game was because of drugs. Allow me to explain. Before games, a lot of players have a routine, and that routine involves properly putting things in their body to give them strength and give them energy. And for the players on the Oilers, throughout this winning streak of theirs, they took amino acids before games. There's nothing too unusual about that. There are tons of benefits to taking amino acids before a game or a workout. Heck, you might do that too, with two of the main benefits being that it gives you extra strength and helps prevent fatigue. A football game is a long endeavor, having to run at full speed and hit guys for 3 hours. So to have something in your body to help you throughout that process is good. There is nothing illegal about this, and there is nothing in the rulebook about this. Players are allowed to take amino acids before a game, and there is nothing stopping you from taking proteins beforehand. Plenty of teams and players do it. The Oilers did it all season, and they did it throughout their entire winning streak. However, for some bizarre reason, before the game, the team doctors gave them a completely different brand of amino acids than the ones they were accustomed to taking. Again, I have no clue why they did this. The Oilers were on a winning streak, so you don't mess up a winning formula. The game was in Houston, so it wouldn't be hard to find that brand again if need be. Maybe the brand was out of stock for the holiday season for some reason. Maybe someone royally screwed up their job. Maybe they hired an intern and he messed up. I have no clue. But the end result was something along the lines of if you've been taking Dayquil before your workday, and you go out and accidentally buy NyQuil and take that. It messes up your system and has the exact opposite effect of what you wanted. And the Oilers, for some reason, did that here. Despite winning 5 of their last 7 and looking great while doing it, the team nutrition staff and doctors and whatnot gave them a completely different brand of amino acids. And safe to say, it very clearly did not work, as when that second half kicked in, you could absolutely see the fatigue. You could see the team looking worse and stuck in the mud and sluggish. And while you might have thought watching this game live that it had to do with the coaching or just sloppiness by the players and a lack of focus, as it turned out, it was drugs. It was literally drugs. Said Bubba McDowell, a rookie defensive back for the Oilers at the time, who would eventually play 6 seasons for the team and be named an AP second-team All-Pro in 1991, on why the second half was such a disaster: we were getting tired. We always take a whole bunch of amino acids before the game. This time, they gave us some new ones. A lot of guys said they didn't like them. So there you have it. The Oilers played like crap down the stretch and almost lost this game and missed the playoffs because their players took the wrong proteins. They were given the wrong brand, and it screwed them up in a big-time way. Their bodies had no idea what to do. And unfortunately for the Houston Oilers, The second half against the game between these two teams behind me right here turned out to be a pretty bad omen for how the rest of their season was going to go. They lost their next game 61-7 to the Cincinnati Bengals, then lost on ESPN in front of a national television audience to the Cleveland Browns, and then in the playoffs, they lost in overtime to the Pittsburgh Steelers, and did not win the division despite having that cushion. No word on whether the Oilers went back to the original amino acids that they were taking beforehand after this debacle against the Buccaneers. But it just goes to show you the number one rule with any winning streak. You do not mess up a winning formula. You do not change what's working for you. You just don't. So what's the moral of the story here? If something is clearly working for you, then don't switch it up, especially when it comes to what you put in your body. That is about the worst thing that you can do. If you feel good, don't take something that has a chance of making you feel less good. It's not worth it. If you feel productive, don't take something that has the chance of making you feel less productive. It's not worth it. Again, what the Oilers were thinking here, I have no clue. But in 1989, during their game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the different brand of amino acids that the players took definitely had the players and their bodies thinking, what the buck? Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.